Think you can just waltz in here and take Earth? Captain Valen Dragor's voice cracked like a whip, his tone sharp enough to slice through the tension hanging in the command room. His boots scraped against the metal floor, each step echoing in the dead air of the council chamber. The Zalkars, the alien coalition's highest generals, sat across from him, staring at the human who dared challenge their fleet. His fingers hovered over the plasma display before him, the bright orange laser patterns flickering in defiance of the invincible alien might that had crossed their way. He didn't need to raise his voice. The gravity of his words alone was enough to leave a deep imprint. "You're making a mistake," Dragor continued, the grit in his voice steady, each word landing with brutal honesty. "Underestimating Earth will be your last. We don't win with firepower. We don't win with your shiny tech. We win with our will, our unpredictability." The aliens around him, tall, sleek-bodied, with their segmented exoskeletons glinting under the harsh overhead lights, exchanged skeptical glances. Their compound eyes glistened with dismissive confidence. General Cyrex, the leader of the coalition, leaned forward, his massive talons clicking against the dark metal table. "Your will be crushed beneath the might of our fleets," Cyrex sneered, his voice a low, unsettling growl. "You can't even match our technology. What you speak of is a myth, a relic from a time when your people still believed they could conquer the stars with brute strength." Dragor's eyes hardened, narrowing to dangerous slits as he took a deliberate step toward Cyrex. His fingers clenched into fists, but he held his ground. The tension in the room was palpable. He wasn't going to shout. He wasn't going to lose his calm, but the undercurrent of fury running through him was undeniable. He had been here before, when the aliens had underestimated humanity. He wasn't about to let it happen again. "You know what makes humans different, Cyrex? It's not the power of our weapons," Dragor spat, his words sharp. "It's that when we're backed into a corner, we don't give up. We fight dirty, and you'll see that soon enough." He turned away from Cyrex, scanning the council. His eyes fell on General Thrall, a younger alien in his ranks, who seemed almost too eager for battle. His body twitched with impatience, clearly unaware of the danger in front of him. Dragor's lips curled into a tight smile, not a hint of amusement in his expression. "Tell your fleet to be ready for something they can't predict," Dragor muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. "Your technology won't save you. We're about to make your ships into ghosts." There was a long pause in the room, the silence hanging thick like smoke. Dragor's words resonated in the minds of the generals, but the truth of it had yet to land. Cyrex rose to his full height, a towering, menacing figure as he glared at Dragor. His voice was deep, yet barely more than a rasp. "We've heard enough of your nonsense, human. Your species is already lost. Your precious Earth will fall within weeks, and you will be nothing more than a memory, if we even remember to write you into the histories." Dragor's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he tapped a sequence on the laser display before him, the glowing lines forming complex, intersecting routes across a simulated map of Earth's orbit. "Leave while you still can, Cyrex. Consider this my final warning. Earth is not a prize. It's a death trap." Cyrex's only response was a cold, merciless smile as he turned away, signaling the end of their meeting. Dragor could feel the collective weight of their indifference pressing against him like 100 tons of stone. They thought they were invincible, and the worst part was, they were right, until they weren't. The door slid shut behind Dragor with a soft hiss, leaving him standing alone in the dimly lit hall. The air smelled faintly of rust and the metallic tang of unclean air recyclers. His boots clicked against the floor as he strode forward, his eyes fixed on the distant command center. But his mind was elsewhere, calculating, anticipating. He didn't have time for doubt. He didn't have time for fear. He could already feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, his pulse steady but urgent. A storm was coming, and humanity's survival would depend on how quickly they adapted. The aliens would learn that their victory wasn't guaranteed, not by a long shot. As Dragor entered the command center, his team was already waiting, gathered around a table littered with holographic maps and flashing data streams. They were a mix of battle-weary veterans and younger, eager officers who had yet to see the true horrors of war. Each face was etched with the weight of uncertainty, but there was a fire in their eyes. They understood what was at stake. Captain Varric Reese, a grizzled veteran of the First War, stood at the head of the table, his broad shoulders and steady gaze offering a silent reassurance. "They won't listen, will they?" Varric asked, his voice low but resolute. Dragor shook his head, taking his place at the table. "Number. But they'll regret it." Varric let out a short laugh, the sound of it cutting through the thick tension. "We better be ready then. We've got one chance at this." "More than one," Dragor replied, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly as he glanced over the table at his assembled officers. "We've got humanity's greatest weapon, chaos. Their arrogance is their weakness. We'll turn every advantage they think they have into their greatest failure." The room was quiet for a moment, each of them digesting the gravity of his words. Dragor's gaze sharpened, and he leaned over the table, flicking his fingers over the holographic display. Maps of alien fleet movements and Earth's defensive positions filled the air, swirling in bright blue and green hues. "We'll start with the environment," Dragor said. "Earth's gravity, our atmosphere, our wildlife. They'll be the ones struggling to adapt. Their ships can't handle our conditions. We use that. Disrupt their navigation systems, sabotage their supply lines, turn their tech against them." "Just like we did in the First War," Varric remarked, the nostalgia in his voice underscoring a painful but necessary truth. "Exactly," Dragor muttered, tapping the display to zoom in on a set of coordinates. "But this time, we have something they'll never expect. We've got ancient technology that was deemed too dangerous, even by us. It's time we used it." The hum of anticipation filled the room, but Dragor's voice cut through it like a cold wind. "Let's make them pay for their arrogance." As the team around him began setting their plans into motion, Dragor stood at the edge of the room, his fingers grazing the cold surface of the command center's wall. Outside, the first waves of the alien fleet could already be seen streaking across the sky, a reminder of the war that was about to engulf their world. The command center was alive with a tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Dragor's fingers traced over the laser plasma display, eyes fixed on the swirling map of Earth's orbit, where the alien fleet was now making its descent. The room felt hotter than usual, the metallic walls radiating the heat of unspoken worries. But Dragor stood still, his face unreadable. The silent buzz of activity around him did nothing to shake his focus. If anything, the intensity around him only sharpened his thoughts. Varric Reese stood beside him, one hand resting on the cool edge of the table, his broad frame blocking the dim light as he leaned in close. The room was an odd mix of high-tech efficiency and brutal human grit, a battleground in itself. "They think they've got us cornered. Every move they make screams overconfidence," Varric said quietly, but the words held no joy. They were a simple acknowledgement of the fact that they were all staring at a war they hadn't asked for. "We'll need more than sabotage to outmaneuver them this time, Valen." Dragor didn't respond right away. His mind was still on the alien coalition, the Zalkars. For all their grandeur, their technology, and their monstrous fleets, they had underestimated something he knew they would come to regret. They had dismissed him, the warnings he had given them now echoing in his mind. He allowed the sound of the display clicking under his fingers to fill the silence before he spoke, his voice low but steady. "We'll turn their overconfidence against them. They'll never expect it." Varric let out a small, dry chuckle. "They never do they?" His eyes flicked toward the smaller officers scattered around the room, some whispering into their heads-up displays, others hunched over their notes. The room smelled faintly of sweat and sharp chemical cleaners, a reminder that despite the tech at their fingertips, they were still human, still facing something much larger than themselves. But even now, the seasoned Marine saw something in Dragor's eyes that fueled a flicker of hope. "What's the plan, then?" Dragor's fingers danced across the display, flicking through tactical diagrams and maps. "The environment's our first weapon. The Zalcars don't know how our gravity feels. They don't know how our terrain can shift without warning. Earth's atmosphere is a beast they'll never tame. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in as he stepped away from the map. We'll use their weaknesses against them, force them into situations where their tech is rendered useless. The air in the room thickened. It was the quiet before a storm, the moment when all eyes turned toward Dragor, waiting for the specifics. His hand clenched into a fist at his side, and the team fell into line. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a chance to show the galaxy exactly what humanity was capable of. "Ready the team," Dragor continued, his voice cutting through the air like a sharpened edge. "We'll start by disrupting their supply lines. Their fleet relies on an unbroken supply chain to function. If we sever that, they'll lose the ability to coordinate. We can blind them, confuse them. They'll think it's a fluke, but we'll keep them guessing long enough to make a move they'll regret." As Dragor laid out his strategy, Captain Reese pulled up a holographic schematic on his own heads-up display, the complex lines of the map unfolding in real time. The tight corridors of Earth's orbit were now alive with movement, the alien ships like darkened blips against the vastness of space. Varek's hands hovered over the controls, adjusting parameters and fine-tuning routes for maximum disruption. The energy in the room intensified. "We're not going to make this easy for them," Varek muttered, his eyes narrowing as he navigated through the coordinates. His fingers were steady, practiced. "And we can't afford mistakes. You said chaos is our weapon. Let's make sure we wield it well." Dragor's eyes remained fixed on the display. "It'll be chaos, yes, but calculated. They won't know which way we're coming from next." The sound of doors sliding open echoed through the room, and a young lieutenant stepped in, his face tense. His uniform was wrinkled from a long shift, but there was fire in his gaze. A trace of fear, yes, but more determination. "Captain Dragor," the lieutenant said, his voice trembling slightly, "we've located their secondary fleet on the far side of the system. They've just made a jump. We can use this information to our advantage." Dragor turned slowly, locking eyes with the lieutenant, reading the unease beneath the surface. "Do they suspect anything?" "No, sir," the lieutenant replied. "They believe their movements are cloaked. They think we won't see them coming." Dragor nodded. "Good. That's exactly what we need. Varek, you'll lead the team to infiltrate their perimeter. I want their blind spots exploited, their communication networks compromised. The moment they realize their plan is falling apart, that's when we hit them with everything we've got." Varek's lips curled into a grim smile. "Understood, sir. We'll make them see ghosts." As Varek departed, Dragor turned to the remaining officers, his expression hardening. "This is only the beginning. We don't just fight with weapons, we fight with our minds. We make them question everything they know about war. Let's give them a reason to fear Earth." The team moved swiftly, preparing their gear, checking weapons, and ensuring every detail was in place. Dragor watched them with an intensity that belied the calm of his voice. He could feel the weight of the upcoming battle like a storm just on the horizon, pressing down on his shoulders. They had the upper hand now, but the fight was far from over. Every move had to count. Outside, the sky above Earth was darkening. The alien fleet continued its descent, unaware that humanity had already made its first move. The stars, once a symbol of peace, now felt like an ominous sign of war. Dragor stared at the dark expanse, the faint hum of the ship's engines vibrating under his boots. The scent of metal and sweat clung to the air, a constant reminder of the stakes. In the distance, the first of the alien ships entered Earth's orbit, their massive forms eclipsing the stars behind them. They were the harbingers of destruction, but they didn't know they were walking into their own annihilation. Dragor grinned, feeling the fire in his chest. It was time. "Let's show them how humans fight," he whispered to himself. The ship's hull trembled beneath him, and Dragor straightened his posture. The battle for Earth was underway, but it wouldn't be fought with brute force alone. They would bleed the alien invaders in ways they couldn't even fathom. The stage was set. The chaos had begun, and it would be humanity's finest hour. Dragor's boots scraped across the cold steel of the command deck, the steady rhythm of his steps a constant companion in the eerie silence that had overtaken the room. The laser plasma display in front of him flickered, casting harsh blue light over his face. The dim glow illuminated the furrows in his brow, the weight of the alien fleet's impending strike hanging heavy on his shoulders. It had been a day since he had given the order to disrupt their supply lines, but every moment felt like the calm before a storm, waiting, calculating. "Sir?" A voice broke the silence, low and strained. It was Lieutenant Corrin, his face pale beneath the grime that had collected from hours of tense preparation. His fingers moved quickly over his own heads-up display, the soft tap of each key a counterpoint to the urgency in his voice. "The aliens haven't reacted. Their fleets are still moving toward the planet. It's like they haven't noticed the disruption." Dragor's lips tightened into a thin line, his eyes narrowing as he studied the display. The alien ships were still on their course, their formations as precise as ever. Too precise, almost. It didn't make sense. The disruption was supposed to cripple their coordination, to force them to question every tactical advantage they'd assumed to have. Instead, they sailed forward, unfazed, almost too confident. "Stay on them," Dragor muttered, the tension in his voice barely masked. "They're not reacting the way they should. Something's off." A soft beep echoed from the corner of the room, and Dragor's attention snapped to the heads-up display. His fingers moved instinctively, manipulating the interface with fluid movements. The data came through, lines of red and blue flashing, and his heart skipped a beat. The aliens had adjusted, too quickly, too smoothly. They had countered the disruption. "Damn it," Dragor muttered under his breath. "They're not just reacting to our tactics. They're anticipating them." Varric Reese appeared at Dragor's side, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, his face set in a grim expression. "You think they knew?" he asked, his voice low, but carrying a weight of suspicion. Dragor hesitated for a moment before responding, his fingers still dancing across the display. "I don't know. But they've had enough time to adapt, and it's not by luck. They must have anticipated we'd go for their supply lines. That's why they're still moving forward, without a second thought." Varric's jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck tightening. "So they've got an inside man? Or worse, an algorithm?" Dragor glanced up, locking eyes with Varric. "It's possible. They've got tech we can barely comprehend. But right now, we don't have time to question their every move. We need to force their hand before they realize what we've been up to." Varric turned to the rest of the room, his gaze sweeping over the officers, most of whom were hunched over their own heads-up displays, watching the data shift in real time. "What's the next move, then?" he asked, his tone sharper now, demanding action. Dragor stood still for a moment, watching the alien fleet advance with eerie calmness. His mind was working in overdrive, calculating and recalculating, adjusting and readjusting. A feeling of unease gnawed at him, a strange suspicion that they were being led into a trap. But Dragor couldn't afford to hesitate. Not now. Not with Earth's survival hanging by a thread. "We force them to scatter. We make them fight on our terms," Dragor said, the plan forming in his mind as he spoke. "Varric, take your team and hit their forward command. Blind their communications. Cut them off from their fleet. We'll use every advantage we have, our gravity, our terrain, the way our environment shifts unpredictably. They think they're in control, but we're going to make sure they can't even see us coming." Varric nodded without a word, the flicker of understanding passing between them. Dragor didn't need to explain further. The alien forces might have had the advantage of technology, but humanity had always been resourceful, and it was their adaptability, their unwillingness to give in, that had allowed them to survive countless hardships. Now it was time to show the aliens that Earth's greatest strength was not its weapons, but its ability to turn the unknown into an advantage. "We'll make them feel like they're drowning," Varric said, a hint of grim satisfaction in his voice. He turned to his team and gave the signal. In the next few moments, the room came alive with the sound of officers barking commands, preparing for the mission that would shift the course of the battle. There was no hesitation now. They were in it together. Dragor watched as the room fell into motion. His thoughts shifted to the final element of his plan, the one thing he hadn't shared with anyone yet. The forbidden AI. It had been dormant for years, its existence considered too dangerous even for Earth's most hardened strategists. But in this war, the stakes were too high to leave anything to chance. If the aliens had begun adapting to their moves so quickly, they had to be expecting the same old tactics humanity always used. They wouldn't see the new weapon coming. The AI would level the playing field. But using it came with risks, both personal and strategic. The moment they activated it, there would be no turning back. There was no guarantee it wouldn't spiral out of control. Still, Dragor felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. There was no room for second-guessing now. "Call in the engineers," Dragor ordered, his voice steady despite the turmoil churning in his gut. "Prepare the AI, we'll need it." Corin nodded, his face pale but resolute. "Understood, sir." As the officers filed out to execute their orders, Dragor remained at the center of the room, staring at the alien fleet on the laser plasma display. The ship's hull vibrated beneath him, as if in response to his resolve. The earth beneath their feet was shaking, and the storm was only just beginning. In the distance, the first explosions from Varek's team echoed across the communication lines, the shock waves reverberating through space. Dragor could feel it now. The shift. The battle was no longer just about strategy. It was about control of the very narrative. The aliens had no idea what they had walked into. But just as Dragor began to feel the first glimmers of hope, a new transmission came through. The alien fleet had started to accelerate, heading directly for Earth. There was no turning back now. The final gambit had begun. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The question now wasn't whether they could win. It was whether Earth's forces would be enough to make the Dzalkars regret their decision. Dragor straightened, his fingers brushing the display one last time. It's time. As the room plunged into a hushed silence, all eyes turned to Dragor, waiting for his command. The alien forces were within striking distance, and humanity's greatest test was yet to come. The stage was set. The only question now was, who would come out alive? The command deck was alive with a buzzing tension, but there was no time for relaxation. Dragor's fingers hovered over the heads-up display, the soft light of the laser plasma illuminating his worn face as he adjusted the fleet's positioning. The room was tight, enclosed by the hum of systems working overtime, but it felt colder now, the air thick with the impending violence. He could hear the shuffle of boots and the low murmur of conversations that turned quickly into silent stares as they readied for the assault. His mind spun in sharp, calculated thoughts, but beneath it all, something gnawed at him, a growing unease, the feeling of being watched. "Sir," Karan's voice broke through his reverie, tight with strain. Dragor turned toward the lieutenant, his brow furrowing. Corin had been quieter than usual, the weight of the past few hours making his words sharper, more deliberate. "The aliens are closing in. We're running out of time." Dragor's gaze flickered to the map displayed before him. The alien fleet had tightened its formation, every ship moving like clockwork toward Earth's orbit, the cold, calculated precision of their movements unsettlingly deliberate. The initial chaos they had sowed had done little to disrupt their advance. Despite his expectations, Dragor felt a sinking realization in the pit of his stomach. The aliens were adapting faster than anticipated. "We can't just keep reacting to them, Lieutenant," Dragor replied quietly, tapping the edges of the screen. His fingers traced invisible lines, plotting their next move, the weight of it pressing on his chest like the silence before thunder. "We need to make them feel the ground shifting beneath their feet." As the words left his mouth, Varek Reese entered, his dark eyes shadowed with a kind of calm fury. He was the first to speak, his voice carrying through the tense atmosphere of the room. "We've intercepted a message from their secondary fleet," Varek said, his tone sharp. "They're still coordinating. It's not the panic I was hoping for." Dragor paused, fingers hovering over the glowing screen. His eyes darted to Varek, then back to the screen. The quiet clicking of commands seemed to echo louder in the moment of hesitation. "They're playing us, then," Dragor murmured under his breath, the words a low growl. "They've anticipated everything we've thrown at them so far. This isn't a game of force anymore." "We don't have enough time for subtlety," Varek snapped, crossing his arms, his voice steady but harsh. If they're not panicking, we need to hit them harder. Dragor stood still for a moment, his gaze flickering over the schematics of the fleet, his thoughts a whirlwind of strategy and impulse. They won't be prepared for what's coming next. What do you mean? Corin asked, his voice cutting through the tension as his eyes narrowed in confusion. We've been too predictable. They expected us to throw everything we have at their command. But we're not going to hit them at their strongest. We're going to make them look for threats in places they can't even imagine. Dragor's voice was calm, but the glint in his eyes told a different story. It's time to get inside their heads. As Dragor spoke, the display before him flickered, a series of calculated simulations and lines marking the trajectory of their next move. The fleet's positions were moving faster now, each ship shifting and calculating, feeding off his plan like a hungry predator. The tension in the room grew with each passing second, an electric hum building to a crescendo that none of them could avoid. Varek, Dragor said, his voice dropping lower, I need your team to hit them where it hurts the most, by playing their own game against them. We're going to use their communication lines to spread a signal, a glitch. Something small, but enough to make them second-guess everything they're doing, use their own systems to confuse them. Varek's eyes hardened as he listened, his mouth twisting into a sharp smile, one that spoke of battles fought and won. I've got it, Valen. We'll break their trust in their systems, make them look like fools in front of their entire fleet. Dragor's attention snapped back to Corin. Lieutenant, I need you to make sure the rest of our forces stay out of sight. No direct confrontations. We're going to manipulate the environment, Earth's gravity, the interference in our atmosphere. Let them think the terrain is working against them, but we won't make a move until they feel it. Corin nodded, his fingers already dancing across his own display. The laser plasma flickered with intensity as he arranged the fleet's movement paths. His voice was steady as he responded. Understood, sir. Disrupt their sensors and make them chase ghosts. Dragor turned to survey the room, his eyes meeting those of his officers. The weight of what was about to happen settled over him like a dark cloud, but there was no fear in his chest, only focus. Every decision had led them to this point. The gamble was high, but humanity had never been afraid of that. Outside, the pulse of Earth's rotation felt like the pounding of a distant war drum, the shifting gravity working as a reminder of how different this planet could be, how little the aliens understood about it. Dragor felt the ground beneath his feet, solid and unyielding. For all their superiority in technology, the Zalkars would learn that Earth's terrain could be more of an enemy than they had ever feared. Once we trigger the glitch in their systems, Dragor began again, his voice calm, we won't give them a chance to recover. The minute they look away, we'll strike. Varek's eyes gleamed with that familiar, dangerous light. You want to blind them, make them doubt their own eyes. Dragor nodded slowly, watching the alien ships on the screen, so close now that their outlines were sharper, clearer. Exactly. But it's not just their vision we're targeting. We're going to shake their core belief that they are the masters of this galaxy, that they have control, that we are a small, weak species. We're going to show them we are more dangerous when they underestimate us. The ship shook underfoot, a sudden pulse running through its metal frame, a minor tremor, nothing out of the ordinary. But Dragor knew the feeling. It was like the prelude to something larger, a shift, a warning. The air in the room thickened as the officers worked in silence, their concentration palpable. The first phase of the plan was set. The last pieces were falling into place. Dragor could almost feel the tension crackling in the space around them, the buildup of the coming battle pressing down like a storm cloud on the horizon. The alien fleet was closing in. The final strike was moments away. And just as Dragor was about to make the call for the first wave, the display flickered again. Something wasn't right. The enemy fleet, those monstrous looming vessels, had changed direction. But this wasn't part of the plan. Dragor's mind raced. Was it another reaction to their manipulations, or had they set a trap? The mystery of it gnawed at him as he prepared for the next stage. The aliens weren't just closing in. They were circling. They were preparing for something else, And Dragor was about to find out just what that was. The walls of the command center trembled as Dragor's eyes swept across the laser plasma display, watching as the alien fleet reoriented itself. Something had shifted, but the aliens weren't retreating. They were adapting, faster than he'd expected. The tension in the room surged, and the officers, each of them on edge, couldn't hide their unease. The flashing red lines on the screen seemed to pulse in time with the pounding in Dragor's chest. "Damn it!" Dragor muttered under his breath, his fingers hovering over the interface. The alien ships were closing in from multiple vectors now. Their trajectory was unpredictable, and their fleet's formation was too organized, too precise for it to be an accident. "They've figured us out," Corrin said, his voice tight with frustration. "This isn't a reaction, this is planned." Dragor didn't respond right away. His gaze locked onto the shifting patterns of the fleet, the way the alien ships moved in perfect synchronicity. The ground beneath them seemed to hum with a subtle but persistent vibration, a reminder of the stakes they were up against. Sweat dripped down Dragor's brow, but he wiped it away with deliberate calm. No time for panic. "What are they doing?" Varek's voice cut through the silence, low and calculated, but there was an edge to it. The Marine had never been one to be easily shaken, but even he could feel the shift in the air. Dragor stepped closer to the display, his fingers dancing across the interface as if he were playing a game of chess, each move considered, each counter measured. "They're not just attacking us. They're baiting us." A strange stillness settled in the room as his words landed. Dragor had a way of speaking that made everything feel like it was either the beginning of something or the end. There was no middle ground when he spoke. "What do you mean by baiting us?" Corrin pressed, leaning closer to the glowing screen. "They want us to come to them," Dragor answered, his tone as steady as steel. "We've been trying to outmaneuver them in the same predictable ways. They've seen it all before. Now they're setting a trap." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Every officer in the room had been trained to face combat, but this was different. The aliens had already adapted to every move they'd made, and now Dragor was suggesting they might be leading them straight into an ambush. "Damn it!" Varek spat, stepping back from the console. "We're walking into a trap, and we don't even know what it looks like yet." Dragor's eyes never left the display. He was searching, probing, trying to read the signs. There had to be something they'd missed, some weakness that they could exploit. But as the alien ships closed in, his gut twisted. This wasn't just about technology or firepower. It was a battle of minds. "We're not going to chase them," Dragor said slowly, deliberately. "We'll make them chase us." He turned, facing his officers. "Prepare the fleet for evasive maneuvers. I want every ship ready to move, every unit prepared for the unexpected. We're going to hit them where they think they're safe." Corrin blinked. Confusion etched across his face. "Are you saying we just run? Let them think we're retreating?" "No," Dragor replied, his voice cold. "We'll make them think we're retreating. The moment they move in for the kill, that's when we strike." Varek shook his head, his brows knitted in disbelief. "Are you serious? You want to play mind games with them? These are the Zalkars we're talking about." "They're not unbeatable," Dragor snapped, his patience wearing thin. "And they've underestimated us from the start." He gestured to the glowing map of the battlefield in front of him. The alien ships were closing in, their firepower overwhelming, but Dragor's mind was already working. Earth's terrain, its gravity, its unpredictable atmosphere, all these things the aliens had never fully understood. It was time to use that against them. "We'll make it look like we're giving up, making them believe they've won. But when they close in on Earth, we'll hit them with everything we've got. The moment they think they're safe, that's when we turn the tables. We'll make them fight on our terms." The room was quiet for a moment. Dragor's officers stood still, absorbing the strategy. It was risky. No, it was more than that. It was a calculated gamble, the kind of risk they couldn't afford to lose. But Dragor's voice had a weight to it, a cold assurance that couldn't be ignored. "Prepare for the next phase," Dragor continued, locking eyes with his officers. "Varek, you'll lead the attack. Corrin, I need you to ensure the fleet is ready to move, and don't let the enemy get too close. We can't afford any mistakes. The officers scattered to their positions, but Dragor remained where he stood, staring at the swirling mass of alien ships closing in on Earth. The very sight of it twisted something deep inside him. They had the power to destroy everything. But the aliens had made one fatal error. They had underestimated humanity's ability to think beyond the obvious. The ship's hull rumbled again, but this time Dragor didn't flinch. This wasn't fear. It was the anticipation of the storm before the storm. They were about to make the Zalkars regret every misstep they had made. The seconds passed like hours. Dragor's thoughts raced. He had one shot at this. One chance to turn the tide. They couldn't afford to reveal everything all at once. Varric appeared again, his voice low and tight. "Everything's set, sir. We're ready to make them dance." Dragor gave a sharp nod, his gaze unwavering. "Let's make them pay for thinking they know us." As the fleet prepared to execute the maneuver, Dragor's mind flickered with the next move. The bait was set. The trap would spring. The only question left was whether they would catch the Zalkars off guard, or if they would be caught in their own game. The command center was thick with anticipation, the silence hanging like a breath held too long. Dragor looked to his officers, who were now gathered around the glowing display, the weight of the battle pressing in on them all. Every decision, every move, had brought them here. Dragor's voice broke the silence. "This is where it all changes. They'll never see it coming." The final countdown had begun. As the alien fleet continued to close in, Dragor's mind remained sharp, his focus unwavering. The storm was about to break, and humanity would decide how it would weather it. The command center was abuzz, each officer in place, their bodies taut with anticipation, their eyes fixed on the laser plasma displays as Earth's final gamble unfolded. Dragor stood at the center, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on him, but his mind was clear. The alien fleet had advanced, drawn closer as he had hoped. The trap was set, the bait taken, and now the moment of truth had arrived. A cold, determined calm washed over him. The time to react was over. Now they would strike. "Activate the systems," Dragor commanded, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. He turned to Karan, his eyes cold steel, and added, "Bring it online." Karan hesitated for a split second before nodding. He tapped his display, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Dragor could almost feel the weight of every finger pressing on the controls, each person in the room realizing what they were about to unleash. The air seemed to grow heavier with the seconds that passed, the palpable sense of something monumental just beneath the surface. In the silence, the AI system clicked into motion. Dragor stepped closer to the display, watching as the intricate patterns of the alien fleet continued to swirl on the screen. The Zalkars, their formidable presence filling the space around Earth's orbit, were oblivious. The bait had drawn them in. Now the invisible line had been crossed, and the hunter had become the hunted. "Now," Dragor muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The laser plasma displays flickered, glitching for a brief moment, as if the system itself had hesitated, then surged into action. A ripple ran through the screen, distorting the once sharp outlines of the alien ships, creating chaos in the data they fed back. Karan's fingers flew across the console, manipulating the feed as if dancing on the edge of a blade. "Disruption complete," Karan said, his voice tight but controlled. "We've scrambled their communications. They're blind to their surroundings now." Dragor allowed himself a brief nod. They had expected this move, had prepared for it, in fact, but the true test lay ahead. If the Zalkars could adapt this quickly, the outcome would still be uncertain. But that was the point. Dragor had to believe that humanity's strength lay not just in its ingenuity, but in its ability to exploit the weaknesses others couldn't even see. "Ready the ships," Dragor commanded, his voice low. "We're going to take the fight to them. Every ship is to move out now." The tension shifted, becoming something sharper as the fleet prepared for its first real strike. Dragor could feel it, a sudden weight lifting off his chest. Not victory, not yet, but a sense of clarity. They had made it past the first obstacle. Now it was time to execute. Varric strode into the room, his demeanor unwavering despite the chaos unfolding. His eyes swept over the displays, catching the moving ships, the distortion in the alien formations. "They'll feel that," he muttered. "They'll be expecting a counterattack. But this will be different." Dragor turned to face him, his expression stoic. "This isn't just a counterattack. This is us pulling them into the dark. When they think they're safe, we'll hit them with everything." The words were simple, but their weight lingered in the air. There was a raw, unspoken understanding between them, the veterans of countless battles. They didn't need to say more. Dragor knew the risks. He could taste the danger in the air, sharp and metallic like the promise of a storm, but they were too far gone to turn back now. "Get your team into position," Dragor said. "We're playing for keeps. This is it." Varric didn't hesitate. He nodded sharply, his jaw set. "Understood." Without another word, he was gone, moving with the precision of a man who had seen too many battles to second-guess his own instincts. The room fell into a tense quiet once more. Dragor's eyes flicked back to the display, now showing the alien fleet trying to recover from the disruptions. Their ships were scattered, confused, attempting to regain communication, to re-establish their synchronized movements. It was a small victory, but Dragor knew better than to celebrate too soon. The Zalkars were formidable, and they would fight back with a force far greater than they had ever shown. "Dragor," Karan said, his voice cutting through the silence again. "We've detected an anomaly. It's coming from one of their larger ships, an energy signature we didn't account for." Dragor's eyes snapped to the screen. His fingers hovered over the controls again, flicking through the data, his heart rate rising as the unknown signature pulsed across the screen. The ship was bigger than the others, its power output unpredictable, erratic. "Is it a weapon?" Dragor asked, his voice steady, but something like a thread of concern wove through the words. "I don't know," Corin replied, fingers moving furiously over the interface. "It's unlike anything we've seen before. We're getting interference. Something's blocking our sensors." Dragor clenched his jaw. What the hell are they hiding? The unknown ship loomed larger on the display, growing in intensity as it shifted, seemingly moving with a mind of its own. Dragor's instinct screamed that something wasn't right. He had anticipated many things, but this was new, and it unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "We can't afford to wait for them to find their footing again," Dragor said, his voice harder now. "If they're planning something, we need to stop it before it's too late." "We're already in motion," Corin replied, his voice taut. "But we need to know what we're dealing with. We can't take any chances." Dragor felt a surge of frustration, the tightness in his chest growing. He was too far in, too close to the edge to back down. And yet, as the alien fleet adjusted its movements, the mystery of that strange ship gnawed at him. "Tell Varric to hold off for now," Dragor ordered, his mind racing. "We're going to investigate this. If they're hiding something, we need to know before we can go on the offensive." Corin's fingers flew over his console again. "Aye, sir." The tension in the room shifted again as Dragor's officers prepared for what could be the decisive moment. They were on the cusp of taking control, but something was lurking in the shadows, and Dragor couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not by the aliens, but by something far darker. The unknown ship moved with disturbing precision, its energy signature flickering as though it were alive. It didn't make sense. Dragor's mind spun, calculating their next move. What was it that they hadn't seen? What had they missed? "Prepare to move," Dragor said quietly, his eyes locked on the shifting shape before him. "We'll find out what they're hiding, and we'll make them regret it." As the command center braced for impact, Dragor couldn't shake the sense that the real fight was only just beginning. The aliens might have been outmaneuvered, but the next step would reveal just how deep the rabbit hole really went. Dragor stood frozen before the laser plasma display, the flashing icons on the screen mocking his every thought. The alien fleet was spread out before him, their movements now erratic, but not out of control. They were closing in, reacting with cold efficiency, but Dragor knew something they didn't. They were still blind to the full scope of humanity's response. "Their secondary fleet is pushing forward," Corin said, his voice measured, but carrying a tension that could be felt in the air. They're attempting a full assault. They think we're cornered. Dragor's mind raced, his pulse quickening. The trap they had set, using Earth's gravity, terrain, and their own technology to confuse the enemy, had worked, but only to a point. The Zalcars had adapted. They always did. It wasn't enough to hold them back any longer. The time for subtlety had passed. "They're moving in too fast," Dragor muttered, eyes darting across the shifting data. He could see the Zalcars closing in on their position, their ships tightening around Earth's orbit like the jaws of a great beast. "But they still don't know where we'll strike. It's their weakness, their arrogance." He turned to Varek, who had been standing silently beside him, watching the display with narrowed eyes. The Marine's expression was unreadable, but Dragor knew the thought that had crossed his mind. If they didn't act soon, they might not have another chance. "Varek," Dragor began, his voice low but intense, "we need to hit them hard and fast. The longer we wait, the more ground they gain. I don't care if we have to sacrifice a few pieces. This is the moment." Varek glanced at the alien fleet, then back to Dragor. His jaw tightened, his lips curling into a slight, grim smile. "You've got a plan, I'm assuming?" Dragor's eyes flicked to the center of the display, where the anomalous alien ship still loomed, its energy signature flickering and unpredictable. There was no way the enemy could have hidden it so effectively without some purpose. Something was off about that ship. Too much power in one vessel. A weapon? A decoy? He couldn't afford to let his instincts lead him. The plan needed to be precise. "We know they're relying on their communication network, their sensor grids to stay coordinated," Dragor said, stepping toward the display, his fingers tracing the lines of the alien formations. "We've already caused enough chaos to get them to second guess. But now, we need to strike at the core of their strategy, disrupt their leadership. If we can make them think their fleet is already lost, we'll force them to retreat." Varek's gaze sharpened. "You're thinking psychological warfare again." "Exactly. But this time it's not just about messing with their systems. We're going to make them believe that victory is slipping away. We force them to question their superiority, their numbers, their tech. When they hesitate, that's when we hit." Dragor turned, locking eyes with the rest of his crew. "Corin, you're handling their comms. I need you to inject a series of fake orders into their network. They'll think their command is falling apart. I want confusion, panic. They'll believe we've infiltrated their entire system." Corin nodded, his fingers already moving over his console. "Understood, sir. I'll ensure the messages seem authentic, disguised enough to trigger chaos." Dragor turned to the rest of the team, his voice quiet but determined. "Varek, you'll lead the team on the ground. You're taking the main alien command ship. Once we've triggered the disorder, we make them think we're overpowering them. Use the environment, the terrain. Earth's atmosphere isn't kind to them. They'll be slowed down by the gravity, confused by the storms. We can make that work to our advantage." Varek's lips twitched upward as he stepped toward the hatch. "It'll be a hell of a fight, but we'll make it count." Dragor nodded, his attention still on the display, feeling the tight coil of tension winding around him. He knew the risks. The fleet would be dangerously exposed for a time. But there was no other choice. The Zalcars had forced their hand, and Dragor wasn't going to back down now. "Everyone else, we stay sharp. Prepare to move once we've caused enough chaos. I don't need to say this, but don't underestimate the enemy. They may be panicking, but they're still deadly." The room hummed with activity as his officers prepared for the strike. Dragor moved back to the central console, his fingers tapping over the display. The alien ships were still advancing, but they had slowed, their once clear course fragmented by the disruption. Every move now felt more calculated, each action a gamble. Earth's forces were poised on the edge of a precipice, and Dragor was about to take the leap. He turned to Corin once more. "Make sure everything is in place. If we don't disrupt their communication properly, the whole plan could fall apart." Corin's eyes flicked back to the console. "It'll be ready." The tension in the room was palpable. Dragor could hear the soft scrape of boots against the floor, the hurried clicks of commands being entered into consoles. His officers moved with the certainty of people who knew what they were facing. They were all willing to sacrifice what was needed. Dragor had made that clear. "Let's make them regret ever coming here," Dragor muttered under his breath. He glanced once more at the alien fleet on the display. There was a deep, gnawing unease in his stomach, the kind that only came before an all-or-nothing strike. But he was beyond second-guessing. They had come too far to turn back now. The laser plasma display flickered, signaling that the first phase was complete. The communications feed had been scrambled. Dragor felt the shift in the air, the slight hum of uncertainty growing heavier, more pronounced. The moment of truth was coming. Varek's voice broke through the silence. "We're ready, sir. Time to put the plan into action." Dragor straightened, his jaw set. "Move out." With that, the command center erupted into action. Orders flew, the officers took their stations, and the fleet began to move into position. Dragor's heart pounded as the countdown to the next phase began. It was now or never. The aliens had been lured, their confidence shattered. Now it was time for the final strike, and Dragor would not let this moment slip away. The game had changed, and humanity was about to rewrite the rules. The seconds felt like hours. Dragor's eyes were fixed on the laser plasma display, his mind racing faster than the data scrolling before him. The alien fleet was disoriented, their ships scattered, their once unshakable confidence eroded by the confusion that had gripped their command. The disruption had worked, their communication lines were in disarray, and their strategic prowess had faltered. For a brief, fleeting moment, the battlefield was in their hands. But Dragor knew that moments like this were fragile. The next move could decide everything. "Everything's in position," Corrin's voice came through, steady but laced with tension. "The fake orders we inserted, they've taken the bait. Their command ship is in chaos." Dragor nodded, absorbing the report, but his eyes never left the screen. The alien ships, once a unified wall of destruction, now seemed like scattered pieces of a broken puzzle, each trying to piece itself back together while struggling to understand the full scope of their vulnerability. Varek's voice came next, gravelly and urgent. "The ground forces are in position. We're ready to move when you give the word." Dragor exhaled slowly, pushing back the tightness in his chest. This was the moment they'd prepared for, the decisive strike. He could feel the weight of it, heavy and suffocating. But in the depths of his mind, a flicker of something more stirred. It wasn't just about defeating the Zalcars anymore. This was about sending a message, about showing the galaxy exactly who humans were. He turned, locking eyes with Varek. The Marine's gaze was steely, unflinching, but there was something there, an understanding that went beyond the plan. Varek knew, as Dragor did, that they weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to redefine humanity's place in the universe. "Execute!" Dragor ordered, his voice low but carrying the weight of command. "This ends now!" The room erupted into motion as the fleet moved into action, Earth's forces finally springing the trap they had set in motion. Varek led his team onto the battlefield, taking the first steps into alien territory, but Dragor's focus remained on the screen. The alien fleet, still reeling from the disarray, was now facing the onslaught of humanity's full force. Strategic warfare at its finest, designed to make them question everything they knew about themselves. The laser plasma display flickered as the ships began their calculated assault. Dragor's eyes narrowed, watching as each alien ship turned, trying to reorganize, but they were too late. The ground forces, led by Varek's Marines, launched their attack on the primary alien command ship, shaking the very foundation of the enemy's resolve. The Zalcars were being forced into a position they had never expected, fighting not just against human strength, but against their very assumptions about what humanity could endure and how it could fight. For Dragor, it wasn't just about the weapons or the tactics. It was about the one thing the Zalcars had failed to account for, the unwavering spirit of humanity. The very thing that made them unpredictable, that made them capable of turning the tide even when the odds were stacked against them. And now, The alien fleet was beginning to crack under the pressure. "It's happening!" Corin's voice cut through the tense air. "They're pulling back. They're retreating." Dragor allowed himself a small breath, but he knew better than to feel relief. The battle wasn't over yet. There was still a long way to go before humanity could claim its victory. The Xalkars might retreat, but they would be back. They always came back. But that was another fight for another day. "Keep the pressure on," Dragor said firmly. "We don't stop until they're out of range. I don't want any surprises." His orders were cold, calculated. There was no room for sentiment now. The final stages of the battle were in full swing, and Dragor had seen enough wars to know that the most dangerous moments often came when victory seemed within reach. But the aliens were in disarray, and humanity had them on the ropes. Varek's voice crackled over the comms, urgent but victorious. "We've taken the command ship. Their leader's down. The fleet is in disarray, sir. They're scattered and retreating. We've done it." The words landed with a weight Dragor couldn't ignore. He didn't allow himself to feel the rush of triumph. Not yet. There was still too much at stake. But as the laser plasma display showed the last remnants of the Xalkars fleeing, he allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection. They had won. Humanity had won. The thought was still surreal, but the reality of it was settling in like a long-awaited storm. Dragor turned to face the room, meeting the eyes of his officers. Every one of them had fought for this moment, had sacrificed in ways no one would ever fully understand. They had done the impossible, defied the expectations of a galaxy that had seen humans as nothing more than another species destined for extinction. But Dragor knew the truth. Humanity was a force that couldn't be broken. They were more than just survivors. They were conquerors, and this victory would echo throughout the stars. Not because of the weapons they wielded, but because of the strength within them that no alien empire could ever truly grasp. "Victory isn't just a word," Dragor said, his voice low but steady. "It's the proof that we, as a species, have earned our place here. It's not given. It's taken." The room was silent for a moment as his words sank in, but Dragor's gaze swept across his team, and he saw something shift in their expressions. It wasn't just relief. It was pride. They had done what no one had thought possible. Dragor's eyes flickered back to the display, watching as the alien ships continued their retreat. The battle was over, but the war had only just begun. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, just as he had predicted, and now there was no turning back. "Prepare for the next phase," Dragor said, his voice unwavering. "We've earned our place, but we're not done yet. This is just the beginning." The door to the command center slid open, and Dragor stepped out, his officers falling into line behind him. The hum of the ship's systems vibrated underfoot. The sound of victory now mingled with the anticipation of the future. Humanity had proven itself, and in the universe's vast darkness, they would no longer be silent.